Independent Air Flight 1851, a Boeing 707 on an American charter flight from Bergamo, Italy to Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, collided with Pico Alto while approaching Santa Maria Airport in the Azores for a scheduled stopover on February 8, 1989. The plane was destroyed, killing all 144 people on board, making it the deadliest plane crash in Portuguese history. What happened? Why did the plane explode? Stick till the end of the video to find out. Hello and welcome to Plane Crashes Explained, where we discuss some of the most mind-blowing reasons and facts behind the most heinous plane crashes. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss future updates. Without further ado, let's get straight into this. The series of events that led to the plane colliding with the mountain were long and complicated, resulting from a slow accumulation of misunderstandings between the crew and the air traffic controller. Events crystallized from a fog of confusion, with small mistakes piling up one on top of the other to create a perfect storm that resulted in Portugal's worst air disaster. However, the plane's fate may have been sealed years earlier and thousands of miles away in the United States, with the company policy of the scrappy charter airline hired to operate the ill-fated flight. Captain Douglas Leon Doherty, First Officer Samuel "Sammy" Adcock, and Flight Engineer Jorge Gonzalez made up the flight crew. Captain Doherty had 7,766 flight hours, 766 of which were on the Boeing 707. In addition, he had 2,259 hours on the Boeing 727. The flight crew had previously flown to Montego Bay, Jamaica on February 3rd. They flew from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas to Denver, Colorado on February 4th. The crew returned to Montego Bay on February 5th, where they were assigned to Flight 1851 from Milan, Italy to Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, with a scheduled stopover in Santa Maria, Azores, Portugal. After a flight of 10 hours and 40 minutes, the crew arrived in Genoa, Italy after being forced to divert from Milan Malpensa Airport due to bad weather. The crew arrived in Bergamo 3 hours later, close to the planned departure airport. The crew spent the next 46 hours in a hotel, their whereabouts unknown. However, a witness stated that everyone left the hotel in a good mood early on February 9th. Flight 1851 took off from Bergamo Airport at 10:04. Flight 1851 had communication problems with air traffic controllers at high frequencies, but it operated normally on the ground. The crew contacted the Santa Maria Air Traffic Control Center at 12:46:33 and reported the passage point, 38 degrees north, 20 degrees west. A trainee air traffic controller was in charge of Flight 1851. The investigators later noted that phraseology was used incorrectly during the communications. In addition, the controller used the word point instead of decimal, referring to a decimal point. Except for 13:43:57, when Flight Engineer Gonzalez requested a weather report, radio communication with the ground was mostly handled by First Officer Adcock. 1851 wind 260, the controller said at 13:44:20. 14 off 14 knots maximum visibility, more than 10 kilometers, 1 octa at 1200 feet, 6 octa at 3,000 feet, odd temperature 17 QNH 1019er. The controller used non-standard terminology "at" during the transmission in the sentence 1 octant for 1200. Due to communication problems, the crew misinterpreted the message as 1 octant 2200, leading them to believe that there would be no clouds below 2,000 feet. The controller dispatched, "Independent Air 1581, roger, you're cleared to 3,000 feet on QNH 1027 and runway will be 19er at 13:56:47, as Flight 1851 was performing a descent to the airfield and passing 6,705 meters. During this transmission, the controller made a critical error. He told the crew that the pressure was 1,027 hectopascals, when it was actually 1,018.7 hectopascals, or 9 hectopascals lower. The instructor noticed this and wanted to inform the crew of the correct information, but he was distracted by a phone call. The co-pilot told the controller at 13:56:59, "We're cleared to 2,000 feet and, but paused mid-sentence at 13:57:02. Doherty said at the same time, "Make it 3,000. Adcock then continued his radio transmission at 13:57:07, 1027. This was Flight 1851's final transmission, but the controller did not hear the first part because he continued to say that the flight would land on runway 19, and thus did not know that the plane continued to descend to 2,000 feet. The aircraft flew straight to the mountain, well below the minimum safe altitude of 3,000 feet. At 1402, the plane passed a height of 5,000 feet and entered a zone of light turbulence at a speed of 260 knots. After 2,000, we'll get below these clouds, Adcock said at 1403. The aircraft encountered heavy turbulence near Santo Espirito at 1406 at a speed of 250 knots and a height of 2,000 feet, with Doherty saying at 1407.52, "Can't keep this son of a bitch thing straight up and down." Adcock asked Doherty if he needed assistance, but he said no. The aircraft then climbed sharply from 1,751 feet to 1,869 feet due to turbulence at 1408.00. At 1408.12, at a true altitude of 1,795 feet above sea level, the plane collided with a roadside wall, skidded through trees with trunks 30 to 40 centimeters in diameter, and exploded. The impact occurred on the mountain's east side. Most of the debris was found on this side of the mountain, though several pieces of debris were also discovered on the western slope because the initial impact site was near the summit. The plane's 144 passengers and crew were all killed. This is the deadliest aviation disaster in Portuguese history, and the fourth involving a Boeing 707. The altimeters discovered at the crash site had pressures of 1,028 and 1,026 hectopascals, and a height of 2,000 feet. The 9 hectopascal overestimation of pressure resulted in a 240-foot overestimation of readings, but when the distance to the summit and the height of the trees growing on the mountain were considered, it was determined that this difference did not contribute to the accident. According to the official investigation, the air traffic controller instructed the crew to descend to 3,000 feet for an ILS approach to runway 19 during the approach to Santa Maria Airport. A trainee controller had also sent an incorrect QNH that was 9 hectopascals too high during that transmission. The pilot likely did not hear the second repeat of the 3,000-foot safe altitude, declaring, "We're re-cleared to 2,000 feet," because he had rekeyed his microphone to acknowledge the new QNH. Even though the first officer questioned the barometric altitude, the captain agreed that the first officer had correctly heard the readback. The crew failed to complete the approach briefing after being cleared to the ILS approach, missing an opportunity to notice the 3,000-foot minimum safe altitude and the presence of Pico Alto. After leveling off at 2,000 feet, the airliner encountered heavy turbulence near Santo Espirito and then impacted the Pico Alto ridge at a level attitude at an altitude of 1,795 feet. There was no evidence of an in-flight emergency, and the altimeter was set correctly at 1,027 millibars. The Board of Inquiry determined that the accident occurred due to the crew's failure to follow established operating procedures, which resulted in the deliberate descent of the aircraft to 2,000 feet, when the published minimum sector altitude was 3,000 feet. It was also discovered that the controller had flown the aircraft 240 feet lower than indicated on board, exacerbating the first officer's original error. Other factors include poor communication skills on the part of the co-pilot and controller, as well as a lack of standard phraseology in some ground communications. In failing to request a readback of the descent clearance, the pilot violated aerodrome control tower procedures. The crew's lack of international flying experience and the airline's inadequate crew training did not include emergency maneuvering techniques for terrain avoidance, non-compliance with the aeronautical information publications of the National Institute of Civil Aviation of Portugal. In 1992, a group of next of kin claimed Independent Air and the aircraft's lessor, International Air Leases, were to blame for the relatives' deaths and sought compensation. Independent Air was found to have acted negligently in subsequent court cases based on the following statement. Undisputed facts show that the pilot and crew flew the plane below 3,000 feet when their charts of the area clearly showed that doing so was dangerous due to the mountain. The pilot in command cannot justify his actions by claiming that the air traffic controller directed him to descend to 2,000 feet and provided him with an incorrect altimeter setting. He knowingly threatened the plane by descending below the safe indicated altitude. He then flew to the top of the mountain that he knew was there. The settlement amount was $34 million. The crash of Independent Air Flight 1851 is remembered today not only as the worst air disaster in Portuguese history, but also as a sobering example of how much can go wrong to cause a plane crash. What do you think contributed to the crash the most? Let us know in the comments section. If you liked the video, here are 2 more that might interest you. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like on the video and share it with your friends.